This is how to install the SE/AK pin plate for the trigger assembly. Useful for installation is a hook tool and a punch. The punch should be sized so that it is slightly smaller than the trigger and hammer pins of the rifle. The trigger and hammer pins are the same size, so if you've got a punch that's the right size for one, it's the right size for both. This is a stock PSL rifle, so if you've never modified yours or made any changes, it will look pretty much like this. First step before doing anything else is make sure the rifle is unloaded. If you're not familiar with how to do that, pull back on the action and verify that no round is chambered. You should already have the magazine removed before you do that. At this point, it's safe to disassemble the rifle. Remove the cover, recoil spring, bolt and bolt carrier, and then in order to remove the bolt and bolt carrier by default, you will have cocked the hammer. Apply pressure to it and gently relieve the pressure on the hammer. You can then remove the safety lever. Do so by simply lifting upwards and sliding out. The next step is to remove the trigger assembly. This is done by lifting up on the two hammer springs and tucking them behind the hammer. Be careful, the ends of these springs are very sharp. Next step involves removing the trigger assembly. The original wire retainer, which you're seeing right here, is what holds the trigger and hammer pins in. It is somewhat flimsy, as you can see from the trigger moving around, and some people have complained about it coming loose on them. Obviously that's a big problem and is one of the reasons for installing a retaining plate as opposed to a retaining wire. To remove it, press down on the wire until it pops out of the groove of the trigger pin. Once you've moved it that first bit, there's actually a second groove there that has to be pushed past. Usually this has to be done while pushing on the trigger pin itself and requires two hands. Once you've gotten the wire over the groove in the trigger pin, you can simply pull the trigger pin out completely. At this point, the entire trigger assembly can be removed. The wire retainer can be removed by pushing it forwards until it falls out or is pulled out through the opening for the magazine. At this point, the trigger assembly can be placed back inside the rifle. And the trigger pin slid through the hole on the left-hand side. With the trigger assembly installed, you can now put the retaining plate in. It goes in similar fashion to the wire retainer, Though you may have to pull the spring aside to install it the first time. Because the hammer spring tends to take up as much space as possible. You know you've got it all the way in when you have the plate sitting in the groove of the trigger pin, the front of it sitting in the groove of the hammer pin, and the hole of the safety lined up with the hole of the plate. At this point you can return the hammer springs to their original position. Make sure each hammer spring is sitting on the end of the trigger for its respective side. Otherwise your trigger won't have any spring tension and won't return. To secure the entire assembly, place the safety through the hole of the retaining plate and through the side of the receiver. With the safety in place, the plate should be immobile, and if you take the punch, you should be able to press on the trigger pin and the hammer pin, and neither should move. At this point, you can begin reassembling the rifle. Start by recocking the hammer. Replacing the bolt in the bolt carrier. The recoil spring. And before you put the cover on, make sure you relieve the hammer because you don't want to dry fire. And that's all there is to it.